The signal was never supposed to reach Earth. It came from the dead side of the galaxy, a place marked red on every stellar map, where no ship flew, no probe returned, and no voice had been heard for over 500 years. But late one quiet night, in a cold listening station orbiting Neptune, a bored technician named Clara was sipping cold coffee when her console lit up. Not just one light, all of them. An emergency flood of data bursting across 6 language protocols, 2 long-range warning channels, and a forgotten backup system that hadn't been active in decades. At first it sounded like static, but then the pattern repeated. Soft, cracked voice whispered something in a tone that chilled the bones. Clara called her superior. The message was forwarded. Analysts tried to decode it. The first translation made no sense. It read, "Help, they remember inside us." The second was worse. "We did not die right." The third never made it to public records, because by then, Earth's command council had already moved to silence the listening post, cut off all external comms, and place every analyst under lockdown. The signal was ancient, too old, but it had structure, rhythm, syntax. The scary part wasn't that it had meaning, it was that it sounded almost human. Not like modern humans, but older, deeper. From a root no one wanted to remember. The voice didn't ask for coordinates, didn't ask for help directly, only whispered stories, names, warnings. Across 3 months, the signal grew stronger, louder, and stranger. It began using the names of dead people from Earth's archives, names that weren't in any public system. A child who drowned on Titan, a soldier lost during the Varex War, even one of the original Mars colonists. All long gone. All impossible to trace, yet the signal knew them. It said they were still echoing. That was when the decision was made. Deploy the Revenant Fleet, humanity's most feared war formation. 6 ships, 40,000 soldiers. No diplomats, no scientists, just weapons. Their mission: locate the source of the signal, confirm if it's a trap, and if it is, end it. With no survivors, the flagship was called Horizon Vow. Leading the fleet was Admiral Rain, a woman forged in 3 wars, trained for extinctional-level scenarios. She didn't speak much. She didn't believe in ghosts. But even she felt cold when she listened to the signal in her private quarters. Something about the voice felt wrong. Not evil, just broken. It's like it wasn't meant to be heard again. The words shifted with each loop. "Do you still carry memory?" Then later, "We sent the scream away, but it came back inside us." And then, "If you hear this, it's already too late to forget." Admiral Rain didn't flinch. She issued fleet-wide blackout protocols. All AI restricted. No open comms. No emotional memory access. The fleet would act as one. Quiet, focused, ruthless. No risks. When the fleet jumped into the dark zone, the stars disappeared. No light, no heat, just black space stretching forever. The ships floated like bones in oil. At first, nothing responded. No signal, no motion. Just the faint whisper that never stopped. It crawled along their metal, entered, through backup systems. Even though their A's were offline, some systems began to react without orders. Lights flickered. Screens blinked with error messages in languages no one had used in 1,000 years, and then the strange things began. Crew members started dreaming the same dream. A black ocean. A tower made of ash. A face in the sky that looked like their own, but older, died and weeping. One pilot collapsed after whispering, "I remember now, but it's not my memory." They found the first wreck on the 3rd day. A massive alien craft, half buried in space rock, completely hollowed out. No life, no heat, no trace of who built it. Just a single corridor still intact. Inside was a wall covered in carvings, thousands of names, human names. Rain scanned them. Dozens matched missing people from Earth's past. Some lost centuries ago. One crewman saw his grandmother's name. He hadn't spoken it in 15 years. How could it be there? What wrote it? No one knew. The signal grew louder. Now it was singing, not words, just humming. Like a lullaby remembered from long ago, but in a voice you don't trust. They moved closer to the source. A dead star system. No planets. No sun. Just debris floating forever. But in the middle of it all was a shape. A small moon, maybe. Perfectly round. And from its surface, the signal pulsed with low waves. Not sound, not light, but something older. Something buried deep in the physics of reality. When Rain's team scanned it, the data came back impossible. The surface was made of something not listed in any known database. Not stone, not metal, not matter. It was something else, compressed memory. Not files, not code, real memory. That's when Rain understood. The signal wasn't calling for help. It was bleeding. It was an open wound in space. A recording of something that had tried to forget itself and failed. Maybe a species. Maybe a god. Maybe something worse. The message wasn't a request. It was a trap. But why would a signal trap someone using their own lost memories? What was the goal? On the 5th day, the fleet lost its first ship. Hammer's Edge stopped responding. No explosion. No call for help. Just gone. Rain ordered a drone search. The drone returned with video. The ship was still there, but it had changed. The name on its hull had shifted. The crew floated in 0G, alive but unresponsive. Their mouths moved as if speaking, but no sound came out. And on the walls of the ship, written in red, were words that stopped Rain cold. We heard it. We remember now. We belong to the voice. That night, Rain didn't sleep. She stood in the observation deck watching the dark moon pulse. It looked like it was breathing. The hum grew louder, though no speakers played it. One by one, the fleet's crew began to dream again. This time, the dreams showed them Earth. Not how it is. It's how it used to be. Forgotten wars, lost faces, whole cities erased from time. And then, as if speaking to each of them in perfect secret, the signal changed one final time. You heard us, and now we remember through you. The trap was complete. Rain turned from the window and whispered to herself, we never should have listened. But it was already too late, because something on that moon was waking up, and it knew their names. The dark moon didn't spin. It didn't glow. It didn't even cast a shadow. It simply waited, pulsing quietly in the void. The Revenant fleet, made of the most advanced and dangerous warships ever created by humanity, now drifted in full formation, silent, cautious, uneasy. Admiral Rain stood on the bridge of the horizon bow, her eyes locked on the round object floating ahead. Her officers waited for orders. No one spoke. Not because they weren't allowed, but because every person in the fleet felt something was listening. From the edge of the observation window, even the stars seemed far away. No galaxies, no suns, no light. The dead zone was truly dead for that one pulsing object. The moon's surface had no color, no markings, but it called out louder with each hour. Not in frequency, not in volume, but in presence. Kind of presence that made the hair on your neck rise, as if the void had grown eyes. The fleet deployed recon drones. 2 disappeared the moment they crossed a certain radius around the moon. No signal lost, no damage. It's just complete data silence. 1 drone returned, but something was wrong. Its memory banks had tripled in size, filled with symbols and images the onboard AI couldn't process. When decoded, they weren't blueprints. They were memories. Human ones. All real. All painful. There was a child's final breath during the fall of Colony 9. A soldier's last thought before being burned in atmosphere. A mother screaming for her newborn in a refugee station destroyed decades ago. None of these matched anyone in the fleet. Yes. And yet, when shown, some crew members collapsed, sobbing, as if those memories were theirs. Admiral Rain locked the drone chamber, ordered its entire system incinerated. From that point forward, no more machines would cross the radius. No more chances. No more curiosity. This wasn't a rescue operation anymore. This was a war of containment. But then the moon changed, without sound, without motion. It opened, not like a flower or a door. It opened the way a wound as slow, raw, and leaking something that should never escape. Inside was not a city or a base. Inside was a mirror, but not one made of glass. A fluid surface, reflecting not light, but memory. The entire fleet watched, stunned, as their own childhoods flickered across the surface. Their worst moments, things never spoken aloud. Moments even they had forgotten. And then, it began talking. Not through comms, not through speakers, but inside them. A voice agent. Layered, cracked, and soft-tentered each mind. You carry memory like fire. You call it strength. We called it death. Screamed to be forgotten. But now you've come to remember. It didn't threaten. It didn't beg. It only reflected. Admiral Rain gave the order. Seal all neural channels. Disconnect any system that reacts to thought or emotion. Manual operation only. Humanity had once created the Revenant fleet to survive a god war. Each ship could function in total isolation, blind, deaf, and silent, controlled by raw instinct. In code, they began shutdown protocol. One by one, AI systems were purged, firewalls burned, soul cores emptied, and still, the voice whispered. Now it sounded more human, and it said one thing that froze every heart. You think you are the first to come. But your echoes are already here. On board Vigil's end, the crew discovered something horrifying. Deep in the cargo hold, where no one had gone since launch, they found another logbook. Written in old Terran script, it carried a fleet insignia that hadn't been used in over 300 years. The book listed ship names, their ship names, with matching crew rosters, matching orders, even the same date of launch. But no such mission had ever been logged in Earth's records. Was this a mistake? Time loop simulation? No, there was only one explanation. They had been here before, or something that wore their memories had. Rain read the final line of the book. We sent the scream away, but it echoed back in us. This time, no one can speak its name. That night, every crew member dreamed the same dream. They stood in a field of ash under a black sky. A tower rose in the distance, smooth, tall, and humming. From its base, 100,000 people wept. None had faces. Only empty holes where memory should be. And at the top of the tower stood a being made of smoke and mirror, reaching out with open arms. It didn't chase them, didn't speak. It simply reflected their pain. Rain woke gasping, not from fear, but because she saw herself at the base of the tower already. Weeping, the fleet held a vote. Return to Earth and warn them, or stay and end. The source? Only one vote came in for return. Rain never saw who sent it. The rest were unanimous. This ends here. They loaded the memory bomb's experimental weapons designed to wipe identity and emotion from targets. Designed for alien thought forms. Never used in war. High risk, but nothing else could touch the moon. One final warning came. From the dark, it whispered through the bones of the ship, through the air, through thought. You remember because you love. But memory always feeds something, and now it feeds me. Rain stood in silence on the bridge, then spoke her. Final command, prepare to fire, no mercy, no record, let it burn. Below them the moon smiled. The Revenant fleet prepared for war, but this was no normal battlefield. Their enemy was not made of ships or soldiers. It was made of memory. It lived in forgotten pain and old faces, and names whispered only in grief. And now that enemy was. Watching them from the black moon below, its surface shimmering like oil, reflecting things that could not be real. Admiral Rain stared at the data stream pouring into the Horizon Vow's command deck. Symbols were appearing on every screen, though no system was receiving input. They weren't numbers or code, they were names. Endless lists of names. Rain recognized the first one. It was her brother, dead 20. Years killed in a riot on Titan. Name appeared on the main console, repeated again and again. Like a chant. Luca's reign. Luca's reign. Luca's reign. Other crew members saw their own dead parents, lost children, lovers, soldiers from old wars. The bridge filled with a terrible silence as each person stood frozen, trapped by grief they had buried long ago. Then the moon pulsed again, and the whispers started, soft voices, perfect copies of the people they had lost. Why did you forget? Me? Why didn't you come sooner? We're still here. The voices weren't angry. They were sad, hollow. But behind that sadness was a hunger, a cold, pulling weight that made every officer sweat and shake, even those trained to resist emotional triggers. Something was feeding on their reactions. Rain activated the internal emergency override. All consoles shut down. Lights dimmed. The room dropped into red alert mode. A monotone voice rang out through the ship. Emotional control protocol. Phase 0. All systems to manual. The crew snapped out of their trance. Not all of them. Two officers stood still and blinking silent. They began to speak in unison, a flat, echoing tone. You cannot erase what remembers you. You called us with your pain. Now we are awake. They turned to Admiral Rain, smiling with dead eyes. Security moved fast. They were sedated and placed in isolation. Their brain scans. Normal to normal. No brain. Shows nothing. These two men weren't possessed. They were empty. Rain called a meeting in the war room. Only the most stable officers were allowed inside. She laid out what they knew. The moon was not a planet. It was a constructed living machine built to store emotional memory. The signal was a trap, designed not to lure in help, but to awaken something inside humanity itself, and now that they had come, was using their own minds to grow stronger. Rain pointed to the last scan. The moon's internal shape was shifting. What had once been a smooth sphere now looked like a face. Not one face, but hundreds layered into a swirling sculpture that stretched into the planet's crust. All of them were human. Each face was formed from crew memories, childhood teachers, old friends. Even faces Rain had only seen once. This entity wasn't building a weapon. It was building a mirror, a way to become them, to wear their sorrow, to take their form, to walk as humans. That night, Commander Salen from Vigil's End sent out a distress ping. When Rain's team arrived, they found the entire ship powered down. No lights, no voices, just a faint song playing in the background. An old earth lullaby inside the bridge. The crew stood in a circle, eyes closed, mouths whispering in sync. No one could understand what they were saying, until Rain heard her own name in the chant. Elias Rain. The boy who cried at the wall, the sister who watched, the guilt, the guilt, the guilt. She knew that moment. No one else did. Not even in her military record. But the moon knew, and it had given that memory to her entire crew. She ordered a purge. Ship systems wiped, memory backups destroyed. But the damage was done. The entity had touched their deepest guilt. The fleet grew. Smaller each day, another person slipped into silence. Not death, but a quiet, walking state of memory override. They lived in old loops. One engineer was found in the engine room, brushing her hands against the wall, whispering her daughter's name over and over. She didn't have a daughter, not anymore. One soldier began carving names, into his own armor names, of people he had never met. When asked why, he simply said, "They live in us now." Rain met with the last 5 remaining captains. There would be no reinforcements. Earth was not responding, not because it didn't care, but because the fleet had already gone beyond reach. The signal was blocking all outbound data. They were alone, and the moon was inside them. Renee knew one thing now. Beyond all doubt, this wasn't the first time the fleet had come here. That old logbook was real, and every time someone answered the signal, the entity grew more human, more real, and more dangerous. It didn't want death. It wanted form. It wanted to wear pain like a body. And Earth had sent it. The best collection of sorrow in the galaxy, the Revenant fleet was humanity's sharpest weapon. But also its most wounded. Now those wounds were being copied. One name at a time. Rain stood at her command post and gave the order. Prepare the memory bombs. Strip the archives. If we don't erase what's inside us, we'll give it a new face. War wasn't just coming. It had already begun. The stars beyond the dead zone remained silent, distant, forgotten. No signals escaped, no probes returned.
Oh.
And deep in that quiet, the Revenant fleet now stood at the edge of a horror. No human mind had trained for not death, not war, but the collapse of memory itself. Admiral Rain no longer trusted her crew. She no longer trusted herself. Each hour, more of them changed not into monsters, but into reflections. Perfect imitations of who they were, repeating the same words, the same motions, as if stuck in a memory loop too old to break. The moon below had changed again. It no longer looked like a moon now. Its surface was shaped like 1,000 screaming faces, some human, some unknown carved into the black stone, shifting and twisting as if alive. And every few hours, another voice was added to the signal. The words no longer came from a machine. It came from them, the crew of the Revenant fleet. Each voice was real. Each voice was stolen. Rain stood in the command tower of Horizon Vow, listening to her own second-in-command's voice echo from the deep moon. We are what you forgot. We remember what you buried. We speak in names, not yours, but close. The fleet science teams, what was left of them, managed to break a deeper layer of the signal. What they found stunned everyone. The signal didn't begin with humans. It began long before Earth had life. An ancient race, now extinct, had discovered the same thing. A voice, a memory trap buried in space, a creature not of flesh or energy, but of collective grief, something that fed on identity. A being made from the forgotten screams of dead civilizations. It had no face of its own, so it took the faces of others, rewrote itself using the strongest emotion in the universe, remorse. This race had fought back. It tried to erase it by wiping their own memories clean. Even built the black moon as a prisoner kind of psychic mirror that reflected back the entity's hunger. It worked. For a time, until another species came. And then another. And now. Humanity had heard the signal. They didn't just hear it, they understood it. Because humans were just like the ones before, full of pain, full of history, full of ghosts. The Revenant fleet wasn't just strong, it was wounded. Every soldier had lived through war. Every ship had, buried thousands. They were trained to be hard, but the entity didn't care about strength. It cared about the soft spots, the memories that never healed, the guilt that lived in the shadows. One of the alien logs, decoded by the fleet's language AI, told the story of the final battle of the Arukatel species. They, too, sent their strongest fleet. But instead of destroying the entity, their own weapons turned on them. Not because of hacking, because the entity had become their leaders. By copying their memories perfectly, they couldn't tell who was real. By the end, the last Arukatel officer wrote only 2 words in her blood, too familiar. That log had been buried in the moon's code, never meant to be found. But now, Rain had it, and she realized the terrible truth. The signal didn't beg for help, it waited for it. It was never a message of distress. It was a lure, a bait for species who still believed in memory, species who loved their past, who kept records, who kept names, who kept faces alive, because to fight this thing, you had to do the unthinkable. You had to forget who you were. You had to give up everything that's made you human, and that was something no race had been willing to do. Until now, Rain called a fleet-wide. It's blackout. No names, no ranks, no more personal logs. The soldiers were ordered to burn their memory tokens, erase their family files, delete everything that connected them to Earth. The final command? Forget your face, or it will wear it. Some refused, they were left behind, but the rest obeyed silently. With tears that no longer had names, the fleet began preparing the mirror bomb's experimental weapons, designed not to destroy, but to blank out thought space. Detonated at the core of the moon, it might shatter the memory web holding the entity together, but there was a risk. These bombs didn't just erase target memories. They erased all memory in range. They would forget their mission, forget each other, forget even why they were there, eh? Full deployment meant sacrificing every truth they had ever known. Rain accepted that she had already forgotten. To her brother's voice, she would forget her own. But she would never let Earth hear the scream again in the final logs sent to Earth before. The blackout rain wrote only this. This was not the first war. We are not the first fleet, but we will be the last. Forget us. Forget this place. And if another signal comes, don't listen. Pain is not always a call for help. Sometimes it's just bait. On the final day before the strike, Rain walked the bridge alone. Outside the window, the black moon began to open again. This time, it revealed Earth, not literally, but in perfect image, cities, skies, children, families. It showed everything they had forgotten, and everything it had stolen, a planet made of their memory. And the moon spoke again, soft as ever. We do not fear death. You were born from what you left behind. And now, we will be born again. Rain placed her hand on the detonation key. Then, she whispered a name she had already forgotten. Goodbye. And the mirror bombs began to fall. The mirror bombs descended slowly like falling memories, glowing dim blue against the endless black. The moment they crossed the surface of the dead moon, the pulse changed. The moon began to twist and ripple like water touched by fire. Faces on its surface screamed without sound, and the signal, the same ancient SOS that had haunted the fleet, stopped. For the first time since entering the dead zone, there was silence, not peace. Absence the crew of the Horizon Vow watched through. Armored viewports as the memory-charged bombs sank into the moon's core. On impact, they didn't explode in fire. Instead, they tore at the past. Soft ripple of light spread outward, wiping away the faces on the moon. One by one, names were erased, images lost. The reflections vanished, but not fast enough because the entity had already begun its counterattack. It spoke again, in a whisper, but in a chorus. Not through, comes but inside every crew member's thoughts. You made yourselves weapons. You came to burn memory. But your weapons are made of us. You carry the flame that feeds us. The signal surged. Screens across the fleet turned black, not off dash blank. Ship logs scrambled themselves. Personal files glitched, showed wrong names, wrong faces. One officer stared at a file showing his own life, but not his face. Another read her mission brief, but it listed a husband she never had. The entity had stopped mimicking them. Now it was rewriting them. Inside Vigil's End, a gunner named Rafe locked himself inside the armory. He began repeating, a name no one recognized. Anna, Anna, Anna. He had no family, no record of a sister. But as the med team tried to reach him, every system in the ship flashed with the same word. Anna, a memory. Planted or created? It didn't matter, because the entity had found a new tactic. Infection by suggestion. Every thought, every doubt, every old scarred, earned into a doorway. Admiral Rain stood before the fleet's last commanders. Only 3 remained. They had stopped using names, just designations. Names were too dangerous now. Even a whisper of the wrong memory could trigger collapse. From this point on, Rain said coldly, we're no longer soldiers. She looked out at the dark. We're the firewall. She ordered the release of Protocol 0, fleet-wide identity purge. Every ship AI was shut down. Every crew member's memory chip burned. Neural links severed. All recognition tech dismantled. Manual. Control only, no names, no ranks, just intent. They wouldn't fight as the entity as people. They would fight it as tools. The fleet would become the weapon. The ships turned downward, toward the bleeding moon. All external markings were stripped, all calcines silenced. The Horizon Vow's hull went dark. It was no longer a flagship. It was simply a shadow, and shadows don't remember. The entity screamed again. This time, not with voices with form, the moon split open. From within rose a tower massive, black, endless, shaped like a spine made of cities, human cities, old earth structures twisted into alien architecture, houses, temples, skyscrapers all, stacked on top of each other, fused by pain. At the top of the tower stood Rain, or something that looked like her. She smiled. You brought yourselves to us, it said, across every channel, every mind. You brought us memory, pain, faces, and now we walk inside you. The real Rain didn't hesitate. She ordered the last command. Burn us. Batteries, no target locks, no mercy, no tactics, only erasure. Weapons laced with anti-memory protocols exploded across the tower, burning identity itself. Whole sections of the construct vanished, not shattered, but forgotten mid-battle. The fake Rain laughed, but her voice broke. You would forget yourselves, just to kill us? You would let go of love, of family, of home? Answer was silence. And silence is deadly when it is chosen. One by one, ships began to burn their own archives. Navigation wiped crew records. Blanked, power rerouted to weapons and shields only. They fought like ghosts. Machines powered by raw. Will no memory, no fear, no names left to steal? The fleet was no longer human. And that was the final key, because the entity could not copy. What had no shape, could not mimic, what did not speak, could not wear the skin of people who had erased themselves. The tower broke. It didn't explode. It collapsed. Inward, as if its foundation there. Memories had finally been denied. The entity howled. The scream tore across thought space like a dying sun, then blinked out, not in defeat, but in forgetting. And just like that, it was gone. No trace, no echo, just the dark moon, still, silent, empty, empty. Ni stood alone on the bridge of a nameless ship, no crew around her, no screens on, only the last line. She'd etched into her own hands, scratched in blood. Words she wrote before. Her mind faded. If this is red, we won. Then she let it go. Even the words slipped from her mind, and she stood in peace, a woman with no name, on a ship with no past, floating in the cold dark, where memory had no more power. The moon no longer screamed, the sky no longer whispered. The dead zone was quiet, but silence was not safety. It was something far worse and finished. Aboard the last surviving vessel, once known as Horizon Vow, now stripped of title, crew. In history, Admiral Rain walked the empty corridors, her boots echoing against steel. She could barely remember her own name. Not because of damage, not because of time, but because she chose to forget. That was the price of survival, and yet memory crept back, slowly, in slivers, not of people, but of purpose. The ship's systems were mostly dead. No navigation, no logs. Just one flickering console deep in the archive room, somehow untouched. There a small blinking symbol weighted on ancient Terran icon used during the Lost Colonies era, a language not taught anymore. But Rain remembered, because something wanted her to. She touched the console, and a file. Opened. Not alien, not encrypted, just a journal, written in human hands, with human pain. This is Captain Loren of the 7th Erasure Fleet. If you're reading this, it means the trap still works. We built it. We baited it. And now, we all have to pay. Rain read in silence, heart pounding. The journal told a horrifying story. Over 500 years ago, Earth received a signal, not a cry for help, a leak. A species known as the Remnants had created. A thought-based entity, something that stored all their collective memory. A living history. But it grew too powerful, too hungry. It began rewriting their minds, replacing truth with pain, remaking joy into guilt. They couldn't destroy it, so they buried it. They carved out a dead zone, built the black moon around it, a psychic vault. Then they encoded a signal, one designed to lure only those advanced enough to understand it. A trap for the curious. But here was the twist. Humanity wasn't the first to answer. The journal showed footage grainy and raw of human fleets sent, long before Rain's time. Fleets that disappeared, not into battle, but into the trap. Because the trap was not just made for aliens, it was made by humans. For themselves, we couldn't allow the entity to reach Earth, Isla wrote. So we built the perfect snare. It's a signal that would call only the bold, the brilliant, the guilty. Only the broken answer cries in the dark. Rains. Hands shook. This mission wasn't about salvation. It was containment. A cycle, every generation. Earth sent a fleet never the same, never remembered. Each time, the same goal. Feed the trap just enough pain to keep it busy, so it didn't reach home. That was why Earth didn't respond. They had never planned to. The Revenant fleet had been sacrificed long before it launched, behind Rain. A shadow. Moved, not a person. A shape. She turned fast, weapon raised. Nothing but she heard it. Not a voice. A breath from inside her. You remember now, it said? Good, you're ready. Rain fell to her knees. Not from fear, from understanding. Because the entity hadn't been defeated. It had been fed, and in feeding it, they kept Earth safe for now. But it also meant that every person who died in this mission had been chosen. Not heroes, sacrifices, and the worst part. They had known. Somewhere. Buried deep in her old memories. Before the identity purge, Rain remembered volunteering. She had seen the files. She had known the cost, and she had chosen to forget. Because memory would have weakened her resolve. Tears slipped down her face. Tears for no one. Tears with no name. The journal ended with a single directive. Reset the signal. Let the next fleet come. They must believe it is their choice. That is how the entity stays fed. That is how Earth survives. Rain stared at the final option on the console. Restart signal? Her finger hovered. She knew what it meant. Resetting the signal meant sending out the same SOS again into deep space. Somewhere, someday, another fleet would find it. Another crew would come, brave and bright, armed with sorrow, and the entity would feed again. But Earth would live. Rain looked out the observation window beyond the dark zone. The stars still shined, still distant, still safe, because someone had to answer. Always she pressed the button. The console blinked. The signal pulsed. The trap was alive again and far away. In a forgotten part of Earth's archives, another mission. Log was quietly deleted. No ceremony, no names, no record. Just a title. Operation Ghost Memory. Complete. The signal echoed through space once more, soft, broken, begging. Help us. They remember inside us. It traveled beyond black holes and dying suns, across sleeping sectors and cold voids, reaching the edge of human influence. Where? No map could follow. Somewhere. Someday, someone would hear it, just like before. It's just as planned. And in the heart of the dead zone, inside the now blank memory moon, Lynn Admiral Rain sat motionless, alone, wordless. She no longer remembered who. Her name had dissolved along with the rest of her past. The bridge of the nameless ship drifted in orbit. No life signs registered, no AI systems remained. The walls were smooth and sterile, stripped of design, of flags, of identity. Rain was a shell now, not dead. Not alive, just emptied. But the silence inside her was peaceful, until she heard a new sound. It was faint, flickering, not the old signal, not the voice of the entity. This was different. It came from deeper within the shipped almost below her, like the hum of something. Still remembering, Rain stood, body heavy, step slow. She followed the sound into the lower decks. Every corridor she passed looked unfamiliar, though she had once known them all. At least she thought she had. The sound grew louder, not mechanical, organic, breathing. She reached the final hatch. Behind it was a chamber untouched by the purge, sealed, shielded, encrypted with voice codes long forgotten. But somehow, the door opened. Inside was a child, a girl no older than 7. Floating in stasis, peaceful beneath the glass, read a single word, Memory Seed 1. And then everything returned in a flash. Rain remembered All of it. The hidden. Project the true purpose of the mission, not to erase the entity, not to trap it, but to evolve it. Memory Seed 1 wasn't a survivor. She was the beginning of a new version, a controlled version, a form of the entity made human, shaped by curated pain, designed to grow with empathy instead of hunger. Earth hadn't sent the fleet to destroy anything. They sent them to teach it, to feed its structured memories loss. War, sorrow, guilt in a specific sequence, so the entity could be rewritten. Rain had volunteered to be its final teacher. The fleet. Sacrifices. The child. A vessel. The entire war had been a training program, and now the child was ready to wake. Rain stood over the pod, her voice cracked dry from silence, but still hers. She whispered, "You were never meant to scream." The girl's eyes opened, not glowing, not monstrous, just, yes, curious, soft brown eyes. Human eyes, but behind them lived the weight of galaxies. She spoke only one sentence. "Where did the forgotten go?" Rain knelt down, tears returning not from pain, but from knowing. She touched the pod's glass and replied, "They become something better." Years later, in the inner ring of the Solar Union, a small research ship arrived from the dead zone. It carried a woman and a child. No logs, no origin, only a symbol burned into their hull. A mirror. Cracked, but reflecting light, when asked who they were. The woman said nothing, but the child stepped forward and said, "I remember everything, but I will not scream." Earth never questioned them again, because somehow, in that child's voice, the stars went quiet for the first time in centuries, and across the galaxy, the entity slept. Not dead, not erased, but at peace. Centuries passed, the stars shifted. Humanity spread beyond the rim, building new colonies, new alliances. The wars of old became myths, and the black zone where the signal once lived was marked as a no-fly sector. It's just another dangerous anomaly. On future navigation, charts ignored by traders, avoided by scouts, no one remembered the Revenant fleet. No one remembered, did Marl Rain. They had succeeded, and their silence had bought peace. But memory never dies, it only hides. On a forgotten mining moon near the edge of known space, a crew of 6 unearthed something strange. It wasn't alien, it wasn't metal, it was a book. Bound in synthetic leather, covered in dust. No pages, only names, thousands. Of them, when one miner touched the first page, the names whispered in his mind. He collapsed. He didn't wake up for 3 days when he did. He spoke with a voice not his own. "Where are the ones who remember?" They sent the book to Central Command. Analysts called it nonsense, a relic from the old wars. Nothing dangerous. But one woman, Dr. Ellen Grief, a linguist, recognized a pattern in the names. They weren't just records, they were requests. Each name was followed by a phrase: "Ask them what they left behind." Ask them why they stayed. Ask them if they still remember the scream. The government sealed the book in a vault on Europa, but it was too late. Something had heard it open, far beyond Earth, deep in a red nebula where no human ships traveled. A shape began to stir. Not metal, not alive, but conscious. A mirror cracked long ago began to glow faintly. Not from power, but from recognition. A child's face appeared in the reflection, eyes brown, innocent, but behind them. Galaxies shifted. She wasn't a child anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. She had wandered among stars, taught humans how to bury grief, how to forget. But now, something was waking again, a second echo. Not pain, not hunger, curiosity. A voice reached out from the mirror, faint, lonely. "I remember peace." But others still scream. On Earth, the Vault network registered a spike, a faint pulse, same signature as the original. SOS signal, but altered. Not a scream, not a warning, just A single line of data broadcast quietly across the void. I have learned. I am learning still. Central Command dismissed it, called it a ghost ping from old debris, but deep within a hidden station, orbiting Mars. Dr. Ellen Grief stared at the message and wept. She didn't know why. She just felt like she had heard it. Before she opened the sealed book again, this time, new names were written on the last page, her name and the names of her children, followed by one final phrase. We remember what they wanted to forget. Now we choose what to become. Somewhere beyond maps and memory, the entity waited, not as a monster, not as a god, but as a question. What happens when pain chooses not to scream, but to heal? When the stars ask again, someone will answer. Someone always does, because echoes don't die. They just wait to be heard.